The world of magic doesn't end with the turning of a page. Love rises and falls anew, forbidden like poison or blazing like a phoenix's flame. The heroes we thought we knew uncover their hearts once more. So step into the enchantment of emotion and welcome to a world where love is written anew. The corridors of the Ministry of Magic were quiet at night, quieter than Hermione Granger had ever known them. The echo of her footsteps followed her like ghosts of old decisions, reminders that even peace came with its own kind of weight. 15 years had passed since the Battle of Hogwarts, and though the wizarding world had rebuilt itself, the cracks beneath the surface remained. Hermione, now Minister for Magic, carried the burden of keeping those cracks from splitting open again. The hour was well past midnight, and most witches and wizards had long gone home. But Hermione lingered as she often did, reviewing reports in her office, lit only by the soft glow of enchanted candles. Outside her window, London shimmered with Muggle lights, a constant hum of life reminding her that the world went on, with or without magic. She was reading a memorandum from the Department of Mysteries when a small knock sounded on her door. "Enter," she said, not looking up. A young aura stepped inside, nervous and pale. "Minister, I'm sorry to disturb you. The Department of Mysteries requested your presence. Immediately." Hermione's brow furrowed. "At this hour?" "Yes, ma'am. They said it's something they've never seen before." Hermione sighed softly, setting aside her parchment. "Very well. Lead the way." They descended into the lower levels of the ministry, where air grew colder and time seemed to thicken. The corridors were dim, the stone walls absorbing rather than reflecting the light of their wands. The aura's hand trembled slightly as he guided her to a sealed chamber guarded by unspeakables. Croft, the head unspeakable, greeted her with a grave expression. "Minister, thank you for coming on such short notice. What's happened?" Croft gestured toward a circular room. At its center floated a glowing sphere, pale, pulsing with a faint heartbeat of light. The air around it seemed to hum with energy, as if the very magic of the place were holding its breath. "We discovered it during our study of magical fluctuations," Croft explained. "The orb was buried deep within the Hall of Prophecies, a section thought destroyed during the war. We detected traces of soul magic, unlike anything we've ever encountered." Hermione felt a chill creep down her spine. "Soul magic?" "Yes, we believe this thing might be a remnant, a consciousness detached from the physical realm." She stepped closer, careful but curious. The orb's light seemed to shift as she approached, like it recognized her. For a brief second, she thought she heard a whisper. A name. Her name. "What does it contain?" she asked quietly. Croft hesitated. "That's what we're unsure of. But its magical signature, it matches something recorded decades ago." He paused, reluctant. "Tom Riddle." Hermione's breath caught. "That's impossible. Every trace of him was destroyed. The Horcruxes, his soul, everything." "So we thought." Hermione stared at the orb, her mind racing. Could this truly be what it seemed? A remnant of the darkest wizard of their time? Or merely an echo, a magical imprint left behind by his destruction? Croft continued. "It's dormant, but unstable. We've reinforced containment wards. Still, the energy increases every hour." "Have you considered moving it?" "We did, but each attempt triggered a surge that nearly shattered the chamber." Hermione crossed her arms, thinking. If it is a remnant of Riddle, we can't simply destroy it. The energy could rebound unpredictably. I'll oversee this myself. Croft blinked. Minister, with respect, that's highly irregular. So is the situation, she replied firmly. Seal the room. No one enters without my authorization. When the unspeakables left her alone, Hermione stood before the orb in silence. The light pulsed again, brighter now, as if reacting to her presence. For years, she had believed that darkness could never return in the same form. That evil was a lesson, not a cycle. Yet as she gazed into the swirling luminescence, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was no simple anomaly. There was intent behind that glow, awareness. Her wand trembled slightly in her hand. "What are you?" she whispered. The orb flickered. Then a low hum filled the chamber, resonant, almost human. The magic thickened, pushing against the wards. Hermione raised her wand instinctively, reinforcing the protective barriers with quick, practiced spells. But the light expanded, bursting outward with a blinding flash. She shielded her eyes as the sound crescendoed into a pulse that shook the walls. When the brightness faded, she lowered her wand and froze. Where the orb had floated, now stood a figure, tall, pale, and disoriented. A man, clothed in wisps of dark energy that faded like smoke. His eyes opened slowly, confused and almost human. Not red and burning like Voldemort's had been, but deep brown, uncertain. Hermione's heart thudded painfully in her chest. She knew that face. Tom Riddle. But younger, no more than 20, perhaps less. No serpent features, no cruel smirk. Just a boy who looked lost in a world that did not remember him kindly. He blinked, his gaze meeting hers. "Where am I?" His voice was hoarse, fragile. Hermione raised her wand higher. "Stay where you are." He flinched, confused. I don't understand. Who are you?" "I should be asking you that." He looked down at his trembling hands as though seeing them for the first time. "My name. It's Tom." He hesitated as if searching for the rest. "Tom Riddle. But He winced suddenly, clutching his head. Pain flickered across his face. Hermione took a cautious step forward, wand still ready. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly, though her own voice shook. "You can't be." He looked up again, eyes wide with a strange fear. "Then why am I?" The question hung between them like a spell neither dared to finish. In that moment, Hermione Granger, war hero, minister and champion of logic, realized that something impossible had just stepped back into the world. And the fate of that world might now depend on what she decided to do next. The hours after the orb's explosion blurred into a haze of confusion, paperwork, and disbelief. By dawn, Hermione had sealed the entire chamber under her personal authorization, silencing rumors before they could spread. Officially, it was a containment breach caused by magical instability. Unofficially, the impossible now stood behind reinforced wards in a private isolation room deep beneath the ministry. Tom Riddle, or rather something wearing his face, sat motionless on the edge of a cot, staring at his hands as if trying to understand what they were. The harsh, sterile light of the room cast long shadows over him, accentuating the sharp lines of youth. Hermione watched him through the enchanted glass, her expression unreadable. She had seen monsters before, in battlefields, in courtrooms, and sometimes in the mirror when she questioned the cost of her decisions. But this one was different. This was not the Dark Lord who had terrorized her world. This was a boy reborn, stripped of malice and memory alike. When she finally stepped inside, the door sealed behind her with a low hum. Her wand was out, though her voice remained steady. "Do you know where you are?" Tom lifted his gaze. His eyes were the same shade of brown she remembered from old photographs in the Hogwarts archives. Intelligent, searching. "They told me I'm underground," he said quietly. "That I'm dangerous." "Are you?" He frowned as though the question hurt. "I don't know." Hermione studied him carefully. His magic radiated like static in the air, wild, unstable, yet not dark. "What's the last thing you remember?" He hesitated, closing his eyes. "A library? Shelves of books? I was studying something about the soul." His expression faltered, shadows of confusion flickering across it. Then nothing, just light and pain. She took a small step closer, lowering her wand slightly. "You died," she said evenly. "A long time ago." His eyes widened. "Died?" "Yes. You were destroyed. Every piece of you. And yet, somehow, you returned." He absorbed that in silence, his brow furrowing. "Then I've done terrible things," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Haven't I?" Hermione hesitated. There were no words gentle enough for the truth. "You have," she said finally. "You became the darkest wizard in history. You waged war. You killed countless people." Tom's gaze drifted to the floor. "And you defeated me?" "It wasn't me," Hermione replied. "It was Harry Potter. But yes, I fought against you. Many did." A silence followed, heavy and unspoken. He looked up again, eyes shining with a strange vulnerability. "Then why am I still alive?" Hermione didn't answer right away. She didn't know. Logic had no explanation for a soul that rebuilt itself from ashes. Magic, however, often cared little for logic. "Perhaps because something wanted you to have another chance," she said quietly. He laughed, a short, hollow sound. "Redemption? For me?" "Maybe not redemption," she admitted, "but understanding, and that's what I intend to find out." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Wait, you said I killed people. If I was that monster, why haven't you ended me now?" Hermione paused by the door, her back to him. "Because I've seen enough killing for one lifetime," she said softly. "And because destroying what you are now won't undo what you were." When she left the room, her thoughts were a storm. Logic demanded she have him destroyed, or at least confined indefinitely. But curiosity, that same reckless curiosity that had driven her through every forbidden text in her youth, whispered that perhaps, buried beneath that reborn soul, was an answer to a greater mystery. Over the following weeks, she visited him often under the guise of magical research. Each meeting stretched longer than the last. She questioned him about magic, philosophy, even emotion, subjects that seemed to awaken fragments of the man he might have been before darkness took root. Tom was quick to learn. He absorbed information like parched ground taking in rain. He asked questions that unsettled her, about morality, choice, and the nature of good and evil. Yet there was a quietness to him, a humility that contradicted everything written in the history books. One afternoon he surprised her by asking, "What was I like before I became that creature?" Hermione hesitated. "Brilliant," she admitted. "Charming, persuasive, a prefect at Hogwarts. You were admired, even by those who didn't trust you." "And feared?" "Yes. Even then there was something dangerous about you. A hunger. He nodded slowly. I can feel it sometimes. A shadow behind my thoughts, like something waiting to wake. That confession unsettled her more than she let on. The Department of Mysteries had already tested his magic, confirming it was unusually pure. Powerful, yes, but free of the corruption left by the Horcruxes. Still, Hermione couldn't shake the feeling that something dark lingered at the edges of his soul, like smoke after a fire. Their sessions became almost ritual. She would bring books, he would ask questions. They debated magic and morality until the candles burned low. And sometimes, when he smiled, genuinely without guile, she caught glimpses of the boy he might have been had fate not twisted his path. Yet whispers began to spread. The ministry was not blind. Too many noticed the minister's growing interest in her mysterious subject. A few officials began to question her judgment. Late one night, Harry appeared in her office, eyes weary but sharp. "Hermione," he said, closing the door behind him. "What are you doing?" She didn't look up from her desk. "I'm studying an anomaly. An anomaly that looks exactly like Tom Riddle." She sighed. "It's not him, Harry. Not truly. He has no memory of his crimes, no malice." "Maybe not yet," Harry interrupted. "But you're playing with fire." Hermione met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "You, of all people, should understand second chances." "This isn't the same," Harry said quietly. "You're risking everything. If the public finds out, I'll handle it." Harry studied her for a long moment, then shook his head. "Just be careful. Whatever he is, Hermione, he's not just your project." After he left, Hermione sat alone in the dim light, fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. She knew Harry was right. She was walking a line thinner than a wand's edge. Yet every time she looked into Tom's uncertain eyes, she felt that old tug, the desire to understand, to heal what was broken. And perhaps, though she would never admit it aloud, to believe that even the darkest soul could find light again. What she could not know, not yet, was that the light she nurtured might soon burn too brightly to control. For somewhere deep within Tom Riddle's reborn soul, the old hunger stirred. Not for power this time, but for something far more dangerous. For her. Winter had settled over London, the kind that draped even Diagon Alley in stillness. Snow gathered on the eaves of crooked shops and shimmered on the ministry's high windows, softening its usual authority. Hermione found comfort in the cold. It made everything quiet, even her thoughts. But lately, her thoughts had grown louder, circling around the same impossible truth, that she was harboring a man the world would destroy if it knew he existed. Each morning, she told herself she visited the containment wing as minister, not as Hermione. But the lie grew thinner each time she stepped into the room where Tom Riddle waited, always composed, always curious. He had taken to reading now, old texts she brought from the library, sometimes the very books he had once studied as a student. When she entered that morning, he was standing by the narrow window, a book open in his hand. He turned as the door sealed behind her, and for the first time he smiled without reservation. It was small, tentative, but real. "You brought sunlight," he said, nodding to the snow-lit corridor behind her. Hermione allowed a faint smile in return. "The auras insisted we strengthen the wards. It might be your last bit of sunlight for a while. Then I'll enjoy it while I can." He closed the book and placed it gently on the table. I've been thinking about what you said before, about me being destroyed. If I truly died, how can I be here? We've tested every theory, Hermione replied, setting down a folder. No trace of Horcrux magic remains. It's as if your soul healed itself. He looked unsettled. But souls don't heal, do they? No, she said softly. Not unless something or someone wanted them to. He studied her for a long moment. You speak as if you believe that. Hermione hesitated. The truth was, she didn't know what she believed anymore. Logic told her this was an anomaly, an echo of magic seeking balance after so much corruption. But when she looked at him, she saw something more than a magical accident. She saw potential. Belief is a luxury, she said finally. I deal in facts. Then tell me one, he challenged. She met his gaze. You are alive. That's fact enough. He smiled faintly, and the conversation shifted to safer ground. Magical stability, the anomalies still rippling across Europe, and the possibility that his rebirth had triggered them. But beneath the words, tension grew like ivy climbing unseen walls. Weeks turned into months. Winter deepened, and the secret between them grew heavier. Tom was no longer confined to his room entirely. Hermione, against all counsel, had authorized limited access to certain research chambers, always under guard and always under her supervision. He adapted quickly, showing restraint and curiosity, traits that reminded her painfully of her younger self. Their debates became legend among the unspeakables, who overheard snippets through enchanted glass, the minister and her shadow scholar, arguing philosophy until dawn. You see the world in rules, he told her once, pacing the room. You trust laws to hold people steady. Laws are what kept us from falling apart, she retorted. And yet they can't explain me. No, she admitted quietly. They can't. He stopped pacing, the air around him charged with quiet energy. Hermione, he said, her name spoken like an unfamiliar spell. Do you ever wonder if I was meant to come back? She turned sharply. Meant by whom? By the same magic that refused to let me rest, he said. Maybe it's not punishment. Maybe it's purpose. Careful, she said, her tone cool though her heart raced. Purpose was what destroyed you last time. He smiled wryly. Perhaps this time, my purpose is different. That evening, she returned to her office to find a sealed envelope on her desk. The wax bore the insignia of the Wizengamot. Inside was a formal inquiry, an anonymous complaint accusing the minister of harboring a classified magical entity without due oversight. Her stomach clenched. Someone had begun to suspect. She read the letter twice, then burned it in the hearth. Fire consumed the evidence, but not her fear. Secrets had a way of rotting from the inside. The next morning, she arrived early to find Tom awake, sitting at the table with parchment spread before him. He was writing, in neat, precise script, his thoughts on redemption, on memory, on whether a soul without its sins could still be itself. I didn't know you wrote, she said. He looked up, startled. Neither did I, until now. It helps me think. She skimmed a few lines and froze. His reflections were profound, almost painfully so, questioning his right to live, his desire to be more than the shadow of what he was. Do you believe I can change? He asked quietly. Hermione didn't answer immediately. She felt the weight of every choice she had ever made pressing down on her. Change, she said at last, isn't belief. It's work. And yes, I think you're doing it. He nodded, his expression unreadable. Then softly, "And if I fail? Then you'll have tried," she whispered. Their eyes met, and for one fragile heartbeat, the world seemed to still. There was no minister and no fallen dark wizard, only two people bound by the strange mercy of fate. But mercy is rarely kind for long. 3 nights later, the containment alarms blared. Hermione was out of bed before the sound fully formed, racing through the ministry's corridors, her robes billowing behind her. Auras shouted orders, spells illuminated the darkness, and the echo of unstable magic pulsed through the air. She reached the chamber to find the guards unconscious but unharmed. Inside, Tom knelt on the floor, clutching his head, agony etched across his face. The air around him shimmered, dark magic bleeding through invisible cracks. "Tom!" she cried, running to him. "What happened?" His voice was ragged. "Something inside me, trying to break free." She raised her wand, chanting stabilizing charms, layers of light swirling around him. The shadows fought back, twisting like smoke, whispering in voices she didn't understand. For a moment, the air filled with faces, faint, translucent, screaming. Horcrux echoes, the remnants of the man he used to be. Hermione gritted her teeth, forcing her will through the storm. "You're not him," she shouted over the roar. "You are you. Do you hear me?" Tom's eyes snapped open, and for the first time since his rebirth, she saw terror there. "I do," he gasped, "but they don't." With a final surge of magic, the darkness collapsed inward. The room fell silent. Tom slumped forward, unconscious. Hermione knelt beside him, heart hammering, the scent of scorched air around them. She brushed a strand of hair from his face. His breathing was shallow but steady. Whatever had tried to reclaim him had failed, for now. But as she stood, wand shaking in her grip, Hermione knew the truth she could no longer deny. Tom Riddle was not free of his past, and if she wanted to save him, or herself, she would have to face it, no matter what it cost. The night after the incident was the first in years when Hermione could not bring herself to sleep. Her mind kept replaying the image of the chamber. Tom collapsing, the shadows screaming, the air thick with the remnants of Voldemort's soul. The ghosts of the past had found a way back into the world, and she, perhaps foolishly, had opened the door. By morning, the corridors of the ministry felt colder. The unspeakables were ordered to seal the chamber entirely while she investigated the event. Officially, it was logged as a magical instability spike. Unofficially, she could feel the whispers circling around her. Rumors spread quickly among wizards, especially when they sensed fear. Tom was moved to a more secure room in the lower levels. When Hermione entered, he was sitting upright on the cot, pale but composed. His eyes followed her every movement. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "I haven't." He smiled faintly. "Neither have I." Hermione placed a small vial on the table. "A stabilizing draught," she explained. "It should help suppress magical surges." He accepted it, turning the glass between his fingers. "I could feel them. The fragments. They were angry." "They're gone now," she assured him. "For how long?" Hermione didn't answer. Instead, she sat opposite him, her fingers tightening around the armrest. "You have to understand," she said, her voice low but firm. "If this happens again, if those remnants resurface, the Wizengamot will demand your execution. I won't be able to stop them." Tom nodded slowly. "Then I'll learn to control it." You don't know if you can." He looked up, and for a moment she saw in him not defiance, but determination. "I will. I must. You said once that change is work. Then let me work for it." His words struck her harder than she expected. He spoke with conviction, not arrogance, not the cold certainty of the boy who had once become a monster, but the resolve of someone who wanted to atone. "Very well," she said after a long silence. "But you'll do so under my supervision, every day, and if I sense any deception—" He nodded again. "Then I'll accept whatever judgment you give." Their days fell into rhythm. Each morning she met him in the research wing, where he practiced focusing his magic through controlled exercises. Hermione guided him, her wand steady as she traced runic circles in the air. Tom followed her instructions with precision, learning to channel the energy within him without letting it break loose. He learned quickly, too quickly perhaps. His control improved, and his confidence with it. Yet there was no arrogance in his manner. He thanked her when she corrected him, and listened when she lectured. Still, something in the air between them had changed. Their partnership had grown deeper, no longer minister and subject, but something fragile and unspoken. One afternoon, as they worked on a charm designed to test the boundaries of his magic, Hermione noticed the faint glow surrounding his hands. The same hum she had felt during the night of his rebirth filled the room. "Stop," she said quickly. "You're pushing too far." "I can manage." "Tom, stop." The light flickered, then died. He exhaled sharply, sweat beading his brow. "You worry too much," he said with a crooked smile. She crossed her arms. "And you don't worry enough." He chuckled, and for a fleeting moment it felt like old friends teasing rather than two people balancing on the edge of fate. But then his expression shifted, his voice softening. "You know, sometimes I forget what I was, what I did. Being here, with you, it feels like a dream that doesn't belong to me." Hermione hesitated, her chest tightening. "You're not that man anymore." "How do you know?" "Because he would never have cared to ask." Tom's gaze lingered on her face, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. He looked away first. Outside the ministry, discontent brewed. The press caught wind of unusual magical research being conducted under direct ministerial supervision. Hermione gave no statements, and her silence only fueled the speculation. Harry's letters grew sharper. "You're isolating yourself," he wrote. "You can't hide something like this forever." But she didn't reply. She couldn't. To admit what she had done was to doom Tom, and perhaps herself. Inside those stone walls, the world shrank to two voices, two minds orbiting each other like stars caught in the same gravity. Hermione, the woman who believed in rules, and Tom, the man who had once believed in none. One evening, after another exhausting round of magical control exercises, Hermione lingered as Tom cleaned the remnants of broken crystal from the table. A containment orb had cracked under pressure, and he'd instinctively shielded her from the shards. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. He looked up, surprised. "You would have done the same." "Yes," she admitted, "but that doesn't make it wise." He smiled faintly. "Perhaps I'm learning from your bad habits." Hermione shook her head, but there was warmth in her eyes. "Careful, Tom. People who start picking up my habits tend to regret it." He leaned slightly closer, his voice quiet but earnest. "Not this one." For a moment, silence filled the room, the kind that seemed to hum with all the things left unsaid. Hermione felt her pulse quicken, though she didn't move away. His eyes were steady, not demanding, not dark, only searching. Then, as if realizing he'd crossed a line, Tom stepped back. "Forgive me," he murmured. "I forget what's appropriate." Hermione exhaled slowly. "It's not forgiveness you need," she said. "It's caution." He nodded once, and the moment passed, but its echo lingered long after she left. That night, Hermione dreamed of the Department of Mysteries again. The orb glowed in her mind, whispering her name, the voice soft and pleading. But this time, when the light broke open, it wasn't Voldemort who emerged. It was Tom, younger, gentler, reaching out a hand. "You brought me back," he whispered. "Now you must decide what to do with me." She woke before dawn, heart pounding, the echo of that voice clinging to her like fog. At her desk, she found another unsigned letter waiting, this one more direct. "The truth always surfaces, Minister. When it does, will your creation defend you or destroy you?" Hermione crushed the parchment in her hand, her jaw tightening. Whoever had sent it knew something. The secrecy surrounding Tom's rebirth was unraveling. And yet, despite everything, the fear, the danger, the storm gathering beyond the walls, she could not bring herself to regret saving him. Somewhere deep down, she believed that Tom Riddle's second chance might not have been a mistake at all. But fate, she knew, never offered gifts without demanding something in return. And the debt for this one was still to be paid. Spring came late that year, as though the world itself hesitated to turn the page. The ministry's great glass atrium shimmered faintly beneath pale sunlight, but inside, tension clung like fog. The investigation into the classified anomaly deepened, and whispers followed Hermione wherever she walked. Even her closest allies began to look at her differently, curious, cautious, as though she carried a secret too large to hide. But she did, and every day that secret had a name: Tom. In the underground chambers, where the air smelled faintly of cold stone and candle wax, he continued his lessons. His control had improved remarkably. The bursts of unstable magic had ceased, replaced by a steady pulse of energy that thrummed under his skin like restrained thunder. When he focused, he could conjure light without heat, move objects without motion, even mend the cracks left by his own power. Hermione often watched him in silence, marveling at the paradox he embodied. The reborn soul of the darkest wizard who had ever lived, learning now to master gentleness. "Your progress is extraordinary," she said one afternoon, her voice soft but tinged with warning. "But restraint must become habit, not performance. Magic reflects intent, Tom." He looked up from his spellwork, his brow furrowed. "And what if the intent itself is uncertain?" "Then that's what we must uncover." He studied her, his expression unreadable. "You speak as if you know me better than I do." "Perhaps I do," she said, meaning it more than she wished to. His lips curved in something almost like amusement. "Then tell me, who am I, Hermione?" The sound of her name in his voice still unsettled her. There was no threat in it, no arrogance, only quiet intimacy. "You are what you choose to be," she answered, "not what you were made to be." He considered that for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Then maybe this time I'll choose differently." Outside the walls of his chamber, the storm of politics gathered. A leak to the Daily Prophet had begun to spread. Unregistered magical entity found in ministry custody. Minister's involvement questioned. No names, no proof, but enough truth between the lines to set the public aflame. The Wizengamot demanded answers, and Harry's letters had stopped being gentle. Hermione met him in her office late one evening. He closed the door behind him without a word, and the silence between them was heavy with years of friendship strained by duty. "Tell me you haven't lost your mind," Harry said finally. She rubbed her temples. "You read the Prophet." "I did. And I know you, Hermione. If there's even a grain of truth in that article, you're walking straight into disaster." She stood, her voice calm but tired. "I'm trying to understand something bigger than any of us. This isn't about politics." "Everything is about politics when you're minister," he snapped. "Whatever you think you're protecting, it's going to destroy you if it gets out." Hermione met his gaze. "He's not what you think." Harry's jaw tightened. "He, Merlin, Hermione, don't tell me you—" He stopped, disbelief freezing his words. "It's him, isn't it?" She didn't answer. Harry stepped closer, anger flashing behind his eyes. "You're hiding Tom Riddle. You, of all people, you fought to end him. Why?" "Because this isn't him," she said quietly. "Not the man we knew. Not the monster we fought. He's something new." Harry shook his head, looking at her as though he no longer recognized her. "And what happens when this something new remembers what he was?" Hermione didn't answer, and that silence was enough. He turned for the door, his expression grim. "You can't save him, Hermione. Some things aren't meant to be redeemed." When he left, she stood for a long time staring at the empty space he'd occupied. The echo of his words followed her like a curse. In the days that followed, she avoided Tom, burying herself in reports and meetings. But her absence did not go unnoticed. On the third day, he sent for her, an unusual breach of their unspoken rules. She found him standing by the window again, sunlight casting gold through the barrier spells that separated him from the outside world. "You've been distant," he said. "I've been busy. Busy avoiding me." Hermione sighed. "You shouldn't read into things." He tilted his head slightly. "Then tell me why your hands tremble when you're near me." The words struck like a spell. She turned away, angry at the truth in them. "Because you're dangerous," she said. He stepped closer, his voice low. "Not to you. You can't know that." "I do," he said simply. "Whatever I was, whoever I become, I would never harm you." She faced him then, and for a moment saw not the remnant of a fallen tyrant, but the shadow of a man who wanted desperately to be something more. "You can't promise that," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Then let me try." Their eyes met, and the space between them seemed to hum with magic. Not the violent kind that tore worlds apart, but the fragile kind that bound them together. Hermione's pulse raced. She should have stepped back, said something rational, something ministerial. But her heart betrayed her before her mind could intervene. "Tom," she said, her voice unsteady. "If anyone knew you were here, if they knew what we were doing, they'd call it treason," he finished softly. "Then let it be our secret." He reached for her hand, hesitant but sure, and she didn't pull away. His touch was warm, startlingly human. For one impossible heartbeat, the world outside ceased to exist. Then, abruptly, alarms blared again. The lights dimmed, the wards pulsed crimson, and the voice of an unspeakable echoed through the intercom. Containment breach. Unknown magical interference in Sector 9. Hermione tore her hand free and raised her wand. Stay here. But when she turned toward the door, he was already beside her. If it's me they're after, he said, then you'll need my help. This isn't a negotiation, she snapped, but the defiance in his eyes was familiar, maddeningly so. They ran together through the twisting corridors, spells lighting the darkness. The air smelled of smoke and broken enchantments. When they reached Sector 9, Hermione froze. The walls were scorched, the runes flickering, and in the center of the chaos stood a shimmering shape, tall, thin, and serpentine, whispering in a voice that clawed at her memory. It wasn't a person. It was an echo. Voldemort's shade, drawn from the remnants of the destroyed Horcruxes, its form writhing in pain and rage. Tom stepped forward, horror in his eyes. It's me, he whispered. What I was. The shadow hissed, its eyes burning crimson. You cannot escape what you are. Hermione raised her wand, but Tom stopped her. No, he said. This is mine to end. He stepped into the light of his former self, his voice trembling but resolute. You don't belong here. You're nothing but memory and hate. I am not you. The shadow shrieked, lunging toward him. Tom met it with open hands, magic erupting in golden light. For a moment, the two forms merged, darkness and light intertwined, and then the room exploded in a blinding flash. When the air cleared, Hermione found him on the floor, unconscious but breathing. The shadow was gone. She knelt beside him, tears she hadn't realized she'd been holding streaking down her cheeks. You foolish, brave boy, she whispered. You may have just saved us all. But deep inside, she knew it was only the beginning. For Tom Riddle had defeated his past once more, and now both the Ministry and fate itself would demand the price. The world outside never knew what had happened that night beneath the Ministry. To the public, it was another containment disturbance, quickly resolved by the Department of Mysteries. But for those who were there, Hermione, the Unspeakables, and the man who had faced his own ghost, it left a mark that could not be erased. Tom remained unconscious for nearly 2 days. He lay pale and still beneath the soft glow of healing charms, a faint golden shimmer tracing over his skin like the residue of whatever magic had saved him. Hermione barely left his side. She told herself she stayed because of duty, because it was her responsibility to ensure he remained stable after the magical confrontation. But when she looked at his face, peaceful, vulnerable, no longer twisted by darkness, duty was not what kept her there. When he finally stirred, she was dozing in a chair, parchment scattered across her lap. His voice broke the silence, soft but steady. You never rest, do you? Her eyes opened instantly. You're awake. He gave a faint, weary smile. So it seems. Did we win? She exhaled, the tension of 2 sleepless nights spilling out with the breath. If by win you mean the world still stands, then yes, you contained the remnant. The echo is gone. He looked away, his gaze distant. I could feel it fighting me, like being torn in half. Hermione stood, crossing the small space to sit on the edge of the bed. You destroyed it. He shook his head. No, I absorbed it. I can still feel it inside me, quieter but waiting. Her stomach twisted. Then we need to isolate you again. No. His voice was firm, stronger than before. Isolation is what created him in the first place. I won't become that shadow again. Hermione hesitated. You don't have a choice. Tom's gaze met hers, steady and defiant. If I've learned anything from you, it's that there's always a choice. She wanted to argue, to remind him that safety outweighed sentiment, but she couldn't. Something in his tone, in the quiet conviction there, silenced her. Rest, she said finally. We'll talk later. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. Hermione, thank you. The simplicity of it caught her off guard. She nodded once, unable to find words, and left before her composure failed her. The days that followed passed in uneasy calm. Tom recovered quickly, his strength returning with disconcerting speed. Yet Hermione noticed a change in him. His presence felt heavier now, not darker exactly, but deeper, as though something ancient and powerful slumbered beneath his calm surface. When they resumed their sessions, his magic responded differently. It obeyed him, but it carried a strange resonance that made even seasoned unspeakables uneasy. He, however, seemed lighter, calmer. Your control is improving, Hermione remarked one afternoon as he practiced delicate transfigurations. He smiled faintly. Perhaps I've finally learned the value of patience. She arched an eyebrow. From me? He looked at her, his expression softening. Who else? For a moment, she saw the young man he might have been if life had shown him mercy. It was disarming, and she looked away before the warmth in his gaze became something she could no longer ignore. Outside their private world, however, the tension was building to a breaking point. The Wizengamot had grown restless. Rumors of Hermione's secret experiments had spread too far to ignore. A formal hearing was scheduled, one that would demand she reveal the nature of the anomaly she had been protecting. When she received the summons, she sat alone in her office, the letter trembling slightly in her hand. They would not understand. They would not see the fragile humanity she saw in Tom. To them, he would always be Voldemort reborn, a threat, an abomination to be purged. She looked up as the door opened. Tom stood there, having slipped past the guards as if the wards meant nothing to him. You shouldn't be here, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. He held out a folded piece of parchment. I overheard the unspeakables, the hearing. She swallowed hard. It's a closed session. They'll demand answers, and I'll have to lie, he said calmly. For me. Hermione's composure cracked. You think I haven't already? Every day I keep your existence hidden. I gamble everything I've worked for. My position, my name, the trust of the people who fought beside me. He stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking to a whisper. Then why do it? Because I believe you deserve a chance, she said fiercely. Because I can't condemn someone who's trying to be better. He searched her face, as though looking for something he couldn't name. And if I don't deserve it? Then I'll know I was wrong, she whispered, but I'll have been wrong for the right reason. Silence stretched between them. Then Tom reached up and gently touched the edge of the parchment she still held. They'll destroy you for this. Hermione forced a brittle smile. They've tried before. He almost smiled back, but there was sorrow in his eyes. You don't have to protect me. Someone has to, she murmured. The hearing arrived too soon. The Wizengamot gathered in the grand chamber beneath the domed ceiling, their robes rustling like a sea of judgment. Hermione stood before them, calm on the surface, though her heart thundered. Chief Warlock Neville Longbottom presided, his expression grave but sympathetic. "Minister Granger," he began, "you stand accused of concealing a Class A magical entity in violation of international magical law. How do you plead?" Hermione's voice was steady. "I plead that the entity is not a threat. It is a life, one that should be understood, not destroyed." A murmur rippled through the room. One witch rose. "You speak as if it's human." "It is," Hermione said. "Then bring it forward," the witch demanded. "Let us see this life for ourselves." The doors at the far end opened. Tom entered, escorted by two unspeakables, his movements calm, deliberate. Gasps echoed through the chamber as recognition swept the assembly. "It's him," someone whispered. "No, it can't be." Tom stood beside Hermione, unflinching under their scrutiny. The resemblance to the Dark Lord was undeniable, yet his eyes, brown, clear, and human, held none of the malice they remembered. "This is Tom Riddle," Hermione said firmly. "Reborn not by dark magic, but by accident of the magic he once abused. He remembers fragments, but he is not Voldemort. I can attest to that." The chamber erupted in argument, outrage, disbelief, fear. Neville struck his gavel for silence. "Enough!" Tom stepped forward. "If you fear me," he said, his voice calm, "you are right to. I was once the cause of your suffering, but I am not the man who did those things. I live because magic willed it so. Perhaps as punishment, perhaps as mercy, but I will not deny my existence." His words silenced even his harshest critics. Then, from the shadows, a voice Hermione recognized all too well spoke coldly. Beautiful speech, but monsters don't change. They only learn new masks. Draco Malfoy stepped into the light, his expression unreadable. "And I should know." Hermione's pulse quickened. The battle for Tom's future had begun, and she had no idea which way the tide would turn. A low murmur rippled through the chamber as Draco's words sank in. His voice carried the weight of old wounds and old truths, and for a fleeting moment, even Hermione felt the faint echo of fear. Fear that perhaps everyone in the room still carried from the war, even after all these years. Draco stepped forward into the pale light of the Wizengamot floor. His silver-grey robes shimmered faintly, immaculate as ever, but his face bore none of the arrogance it once had. Time had carved away the cruelty of youth, leaving only the sharpness of a man who had seen too much. "Minister," he said evenly, his eyes locked on Hermione. "We've forgiven much since the war, but there are things that should stay buried. Tom Riddle was one of them." Hermione straightened, refusing to look away. "And yet, he's standing here, Draco, alive, whether we like it or not." Draco's gaze flicked toward Tom. For a long moment, the two men stared at one another. There was no recognition, but something deeper, an instinctive tension, as if their souls remembered a history that their bodies had forgotten. Tom's voice was calm, measured. "You knew the man I once was. Tell me, was there ever anything in him worth saving?" Draco's jaw tightened. "No." "Then perhaps," Tom said softly, "you were never in a position to see." A ripple of whispers filled the chamber again. Neville's gavel struck against the dais, demanding silence. "This is a hearing, not a debate. Lord Malfoy, do you have evidence to present?" Draco's expression hardened. "Evidence? The evidence stands before you. Look at him. Look at the eyes, the face. You all remember." Do you honestly believe this isn't the same soul that brought our world to its knees? Hermione's voice was steady, but her hands trembled at its sides. I believe that even the darkest soul can change when given the chance. Tom Riddle is not Voldemort. The remnants of that evil were destroyed. By him, not by us. Draco's eyes narrowed. You expect us to trust your word? No, she said. I expect you to trust the truth. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking again, his tone softer but edged with steel. You always did think you could save everyone, Granger, even those who never wanted saving. Hermione met his gaze evenly. Someone had to try. The hearing lasted for hours. Every argument Hermione made was met with skepticism, every explanation tangled in politics and fear. Tom remained silent through most of it, his composure unnerving even his defenders. But as the final testimonies drew to an end, Neville rose to address the court. The Wizengamot will deliberate privately, he said. Until then, both parties are to remain under ministry custody. The gavel struck and the session adjourned. Hermione felt the air leave her lungs as the chamber emptied. She turned to Tom, lowering her voice. You shouldn't have spoken. It will make them see you as manipulative. He smiled faintly. I told the truth. Truth doesn't matter in politics, she said bitterly. Perception does. Then let them perceive, he murmured. I have nothing left to hide. Before she could reply, Aurus moved in to escort them both. Hermione followed silently through the long corridors, her mind turning over every word, every look from the members of the Wizengamot. The odds were against them. When they reached the holding wing, Tom was led into a private cell once more. He turned to her before the door closed. You fought for me when no one else would. I won't forget that. Don't thank me yet, she said. It isn't over. It never is, he replied softly, and the door sealed shut between them. The deliberations stretched into days. The ministry buzzed with speculation, and the prophet published rumors faster than Hermione could suppress them. Minister's judgment. Questioned, read one headline. Dark Lord Reborn? Ministry denies allegations, screamed another. Sleep became a stranger. Hermione worked late into the night, pacing her office until the candle burned low. Yet amid the exhaustion, something else haunted her. The memory of his words, his quiet certainty, his gaze that seemed to see through every layer of her fear. She hated how much it mattered. 3 nights later, the Wizengamot's decision arrived. Neville came to her office himself, his expression grave. They're divided, he said simply. Half believe he's a danger. The other half think he's a miracle. They've compromised. Hermione's stomach tightened. Meaning? He'll be placed under observation. Restricted freedom. You're to oversee his integration, if you agree to take responsibility for his actions. It took her a moment to process his words. They want me to be his guardian. Neville nodded. They trust you more than anyone, or at least they trust you to clean up the mess if it goes wrong. Hermione closed her eyes. It was exactly what she had feared, and exactly what she had hoped for. When does it begin? She asked. Tomorrow. When Hermione entered Tom's cell the next morning, he was already standing, as if he had known she was coming. The wards shimmered faintly as they lifted, the air tasting of ozone. They've made their decision, she said. He studied her face, calm but curious. And what was it? You're free, she said, under supervision. His brow lifted slightly. Yours, I presume. She nodded. You'll live at a secure estate on the outskirts of Hogsmeade. You'll be monitored at all times. No wand, no unsupervised magic, and no travel beyond the wards. He smiled. A real smile, the first she had seen since his rebirth. A gilded cage is still a cage, but it's better than a tomb. Hermione hesitated. You'll have to earn the rest of your freedom. I intend to, he said. Then, more quietly, you've given me more than I deserve. They left the ministry together under the watch of silent guards. The journey to Hogsmeade was wordless, the carriage rattling over cobblestone roads slick with rain. Through the window, the Scottish countryside rolled past in misty greys, the same hills that had watched over their youth and their wars. When they arrived, the estate loomed ahead, a secluded manor encircled by protective charms, its windows glowing faintly in the twilight. Hermione dismounted first, feeling the damp air bite at her skin. You'll find everything you need inside. Books, food, records, and a study for your research. Tom followed her gaze toward the horizon. It's peaceful here, he murmured, almost forgiving. She looked at him sharply. Don't mistake peace for safety. He met her eyes. And don't mistake safety for peace. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of rain and earth. Then, quietly, Hermione said, "This is your second chance, Tom. Don't waste it." He inclined his head. "And if I told you, I'd rather spend it proving you right than saving myself?" She turned away before he could see her expression. "Then, perhaps," she said, "there's hope for you yet." But as she walked back to the carriage, the faint hum of magic stirred behind her, familiar, ancient, and neither wholly light nor dark. She did not look back. For though Tom Riddle stood beneath a sky washed clean by rain, something within him had awakened again. Not the hunger for power, but something far more dangerous, a yearning to belong. And in that yearning, a spark was waiting to burn. The first weeks at the Hogsmeade estate passed in uneasy quiet. The manor, old and ivy-covered, had once belonged to an obscure wizarding scholar who vanished during the First War. Now it was surrounded by enchantments layered thick as fog, each one humming faintly whenever Tom stepped too close to the perimeter. Hermione had visited the property only twice before, but now she found herself travelling there more often than her schedule should have allowed. She told her assistants it was an experimental monitoring assignment. In truth, she couldn't quite stay away. The estate had a strange stillness to it, as if the very air waited for something to begin. The wards recognized her presence and opened like ripples in water, sealing again behind her with a faint shimmer. Inside, Tom had made the place his own. Books lay open across tables, candles burned late into the night, and old magical instruments hummed with new life. He greeted her politely each time, though never without that slight, knowing curve of his mouth that made her heart thrum with both irritation and something she dared not name. On her third visit, she found him in the library, standing before a tall arched window that overlooked the mist-covered moors. "You came earlier than usual," he said, without turning. "I needed to speak with you," she replied. "There's been talk at the ministry, speculation about the terms of your release." He turned then, his gaze sharp. "They're afraid still." "Fear doesn't vanish overnight," Hermione said, folding her arms. "You know that better than anyone. And yet You aren't afraid. She met his eyes steadily. I'm cautious. Caution, he said, is just fear in a scholar's cloak. The words stung more than they should have. Hermione drew a slow breath, steadying herself. If you're trying to provoke me, it won't work. He smiled faintly. Old habits die hard, I suppose. Then you'd better start burying them. She placed a small leather-bound journal on the table. You'll write down your thoughts, your dreams, anything that seems unusual. It's part of your rehabilitation assessment. Rehabilitation, he repeated softly, as though tasting the word. You speak as if I've been ill. Maybe you were. His gaze lingered on her, and for a heartbeat she thought he might argue. But instead, he nodded. Very well. You'll have your notes. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her again. Hermione. Something in the way he said her name made her pause. When I faced the remnant of my old self, he said quietly, I saw what I used to be, and for the first time, I pitied him. She looked back at him, her voice gentler now. That's good. It means you're changing. He shook his head. No. It means I finally understand the cost of what I was. The honesty in his tone caught her off guard. For all his eloquence, Tom rarely allowed true emotion to surface. Now, for a brief instant, she saw through the calm, saw a man wrestling with the shadow of what he had been. I'll see you again in 2 days, she said softly. He inclined his head. I'll be waiting. Hermione returned to the ministry that night, but her mind stayed in the manor. She buried herself in work, committee meetings, international correspondence, magical regulation reviews. But Tom's voice lingered, threading through her thoughts like a quiet echo. By the time she returned to Hogsmeade again, the manor felt different, livelier. A faint warmth had crept into its long-abandoned halls. She found Tom in the study, surrounded by parchment and half-finished magical equations. The firelight glinted off his hair, casting faint gold into the dark strands. You've been busy, she said, eyeing the disarray. I've been remembering, he replied, not looking up. Fragments of knowledge, charms I invented, theories I abandoned. It's strange, isn't it, how the mind keeps what the soul rejects. Hermione approached slowly. What sort of knowledge? Magic without cruelty, he said after a pause. The kind that creates rather than destroys. She blinked in surprise. You're trying to develop new spells? He smiled faintly. Not new, lost. I wrote some of these when I was still a student, before everything. He handed her a piece of parchment filled with looping script and arcane symbols. She recognized the handwriting immediately. It matched the notes recovered from the Chamber of Secrets decades ago. This, she said carefully, is powerful magic. It's also unfinished, he replied. You could help me complete it. She hesitated. You're asking the Minister for Magic to collaborate on unsanctioned spellwork with you. His eyes gleamed. I'm asking Hermione Granger to finish what she's always done, understand the unknown. For a moment, she wanted to refuse. It was reckless, dangerous, and politically suicidal. But curiosity, that old familiar fire, stirred within her chest. Show me, she said. The following weeks blurred into a quiet rhythm of study. They worked side by side in the evenings, their voices low, the only sound the crackle of fire and the scratching of quills. It reminded her of Hogwarts. Late nights in the library, parchment scattered everywhere, the thrill of discovery humming between words. Tom was patient, precise, and endlessly inquisitive. He challenged her assumptions, questioned her logic, and sometimes infuriatingly finished her sentences. Yet there was no arrogance in his tone, only fascination. It was as though he were rediscovering wonder itself. One night, as the candles burned low, Hermione leaned back in her chair, exhaustion softening her features. "You're impossible," she said with a small smile. "I've been called worse." "Don't be smug." He grinned, a rare, unguarded expression that transformed his face. "You enjoy it." "I enjoy the work," she said firmly. "Of course you do," he said, though his eyes betrayed amusement. "But that isn't all you enjoy." She stared at him, caught between indignation and something dangerously close to laughter. "You presume too much, Mr. Riddle." He leaned forward slightly, his voice a quiet murmur. "You fear too much, Minister Granger." Their gazes locked, and in that suspended heartbeat, the air between them seemed to pulse. Hermione felt something stir within her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. But before she could speak, a loud crack echoed through the room. A burst of energy surged from the parchment they had been studying. The air shimmered with blue light, and runes glowed across the walls like fireflies. Tom sprang to his feet, wandless but focused, his hand outstretched. "Containment spell! Now!" he commanded. Hermione's wand flashed as she traced a circle in the air. Light wove around them, binding the runaway energy. The parchment shuddered, then fell silent. The room was still again. Hermione's chest heaved, adrenaline pounding through her. Tom looked at her, half grinning. "Well," he said, "it seems we're still alive." She exhaled shakily. "Barely." He stepped closer, brushing dust from her sleeve with surprising gentleness. "You see? Creation and destruction. They're only ever a breath apart." Hermione's voice was soft. "And which do you think we just touched?" He smiled faintly. "Both." The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. And in that moment, Hermione realized she had crossed an invisible line. Not between law and defiance, but between the safety of reason and the peril of feeling. Whatever path they were now on, there would be no turning back. Summer rolled gently over the highlands, and the air around the Hogsmeade estate grew softer, more alive. The heather-covered hills shimmered under sunlight, and the lake behind the manor glistened like glass. It should have been a season of ease, yet for Hermione Granger, the warmth brought no rest. Every evening she found herself returning to the manor, claiming she came to oversee Tom's progress, though the truth behind her visits whispered of something more. The study had become their shared sanctuary. The long oak table was buried under scrolls and ink-stained parchment. Candle wax pooled like frozen gold at the edges. They worked side by side, and though their hands rarely touched, the space between them seemed to hum with quiet energy. That morning, Tom stood before the window, reading through the latest notes on the containment spell they had been refining for weeks. "You've improved the stabilization runes," he said, eyes scanning her neat handwriting. "Elegant work, almost like music." Hermione gave a faint smile. "You make it sound romantic. It's arithmetic, Tom. Nothing more." He looked up, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Everything worth doing is romantic in its own way." She rolled her eyes, but couldn't hide her smile. "If you ever tire of magical theory, you'd make a decent poet." "I'd rather make something that lasts," he replied, setting the notes aside. His tone softened. "You, of all people, should understand that." "I do. she said quietly. "But some things aren't meant to last. They're meant to teach us." His gaze lingered on her, unreadable. "And what do you think you're meant to learn from me?" Hermione didn't answer. She turned back to her notes, the scratch of quill filling the silence. But his question lingered in the air like the scent of smoke, inescapable, unsettling. That afternoon, a storm swept across the moors, sudden and fierce. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder rolled over the hills, and the wards around the manor pulsed faintly with protective magic. The storm's energy seemed to seep into the walls themselves, making every candle flicker with uneasy light. Hermione stayed despite her better judgment. It felt wrong to leave him alone while the elements raged outside. They sat across from each other at the long table, lightning throwing pale light across their faces. For a while, neither spoke. Then Tom said softly, "I used to love storms." She looked up. "You remember that?" "Not exactly," he said. "More a feeling, a memory of power, the way the world used to obey me." "Does it still feel that way?" He shook his head. "No. Now it feels like punishment, as if the world itself is reminding me that control is an illusion." Hermione studied him carefully. Maybe that's not punishment. Maybe it's freedom. He laughed quietly. "Freedom. You speak of it as though it's something I'll ever have." "You have more of it than most would give you," she said. "And less than you believe," he replied. "Your ministry calls this redemption, but it feels more like exile." She hesitated. "Do you regret coming back?" He turned toward the window, the rain reflected in his eyes. "Sometimes," he said softly. "But then," he looked back at her, "then I see you, and I remember why I'm here." Hermione's breath caught. The words were not spoken with charm or manipulation, but quiet truth. She felt heat rise to her cheeks and looked away, pretending to study the parchment before her. "Tom," she began, her voice unsteady. "You can't—" "I know what you'll say," he interrupted gently. "That this is dangerous, that it's unwise. But tell me honestly, do you still believe I'm the same man who once sought to rule the world?" She forced herself to meet his gaze. "No, but that doesn't mean you can trust me," he finished for her. "Or yourself." The room fell silent except for the sound of rain. For a long time, neither moved. Then, slowly, Tom reached across the table, his hand brushing against hers. It was a light touch, almost accidental, but it sent a shock through her like a spell gone wild. Hermione didn't pull away. Outside, thunder cracked across the sky. Later that night, after the storm passed, she walked the corridors of the manor alone. The air smelled of rain and parchment. Her thoughts were a tangle of reason and emotion, two forces that had always battled within her, and never more fiercely than now. When she reached the library, she found him there again, standing before the fire. The shadows danced over his face, softening the sharp lines, lending him a kind of fragile humanity. "You should be resting," she said quietly. "I couldn't," he replied. "Too many thoughts." "About what?" He hesitated, then said, "About what comes next. The spell we're working on. It's not just a containment charm, is it? You've been modifying it." Hermione sighed. "You noticed?" "I notice everything." She approached the fire, her voice low. "It's more than containment. It's a stabilizing enchantment, one that could permanently balance your magic. If it works, it might sever the connection between you and whatever remnants still cling to you." He stared at her, realization dawning. You mean to free me from it completely? Yes. And if it fails? She hesitated. Then your soul might unravel. He smiled faintly. A noble risk. Not noble, she said sharply. Necessary. He turned toward her fully. You'd risk that much? For me? She met his eyes, and this time she didn't look away. I'd risk it for the world. But even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't entirely true. The following days blurred into feverish work. Together they refined the spell until exhaustion blurred the lines between hours. The final version rested in a circle of runes, delicate as glass and twice as fragile. When the time came to test it, Hermione could barely feel her own heartbeat. Tom stood in the center of the circle, his expression calm but resolute. If this works, he said, I'll owe you more than I can ever repay. You don't owe me anything, she said. Just live. He nodded once. Begin. Hermione lifted her wand. The air shimmered as the runes flared to life, golden light spilling across the floor. Tom closed his eyes, and the magic enveloped him, threads of light weaving through his body. For a moment, it was beautiful. Too beautiful. Then the air split with a sound like cracking glass. The circle faltered. The light turned crimson. Tom gasped, clutching his chest as dark tendrils burst from the runes, twisting through the air like living shadows. Hermione's heart leapt into her throat. No, no, stay with me, she cried, raising her wand, forcing her will through the torrent. Tom's voice was strained, desperate. Don't stop, finish it. She pushed harder, her magic locking with his, light against darkness. The air burned with heat and power. Then, with a final blinding flash, the room fell silent. When the smoke cleared, Tom lay on the floor, still as death. Hermione dropped to her knees beside him, her hands trembling. Tom, please. His eyes fluttered open, faint light glowing within them. He drew a ragged breath. It's gone, he whispered. The darkness. It's gone. Tears blurred her vision. You did it. He smiled weakly. No, Hermione. We did. She reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. For the first time since his rebirth, she felt no echo of the cold shadow that had haunted him. Only warmth. Fragile, human warmth. And somewhere deep within her, something she had guarded for too long began to break free. Outside, the storm clouds parted and dawn spread gold across the hills. But Hermione knew peace would not come easily. For though Tom Riddle had been freed from his darkness, the light they had summoned together might yet demand its own price. The dawn that followed their victory was pale and trembling, a fragile light that seemed almost afraid to touch the earth. Hermione woke in the library where she had collapsed hours before, her head resting on the open pages of an ancient spellbook. The scent of burnt parchment still lingered in the air. She blinked wearily and lifted her head. Tom sat by the window, a blanket draped loosely over his shoulders. The soft glow of sunrise outlined his silhouette, painting gold along his hair. For a moment, she simply watched him, the slow rhythm of his breathing, the quiet peace that hung over him. He turned as though he had sensed her gaze. You're awake, he said softly. How long? 3 hours. You fainted after the spell completed. Hermione pressed her hand to her temple. I'm surprised I didn't vanish altogether. The magical backlash could have destroyed us both, he finished. Yes, I know. Their eyes met, and for a long, quiet moment, neither spoke. Something unspoken hung between them, fragile as the morning light. Finally, Hermione rose, straightening her robes. "How do you feel?" she asked. Tom looked down at his hands as though seeing them for the first time. "Different," he said slowly. "It's like breathing after nearly drowning. The noise is gone. The hunger, the whispers, all of it. I didn't realize how loud my own soul had become until it quieted." Hermione smiled faintly. "Then it worked." He nodded. It worked. But the relief that should have followed didn't come easily. She could see it in his eyes, a lingering uncertainty, as if he feared that even freedom could betray him. "You're safe now," she said gently. Tom's voice was quiet. "Am I?" Hermione didn't answer. That afternoon she left the manor for the first time in days. She needed air, needed distance. The ministry awaited her report, though she already knew how it would read. Subject stable, magical corruption neutralized, continued observation recommended. Cold, clinical words to describe something that had nearly destroyed them both. The corridors of the ministry felt strange after the manor's quiet. Too bright, too busy, every conversation a blur of movement and intrigue. Harry was waiting in her office when she arrived. He didn't speak at first. His expression said everything. Weariness, disappointment, a flicker of something like grief. "You should have told me," he said finally. Hermione closed the door behind her. "If I had, you would have tried to stop me." "You're right," he said, his tone sharp. "Because what you've done, what you've risked. Hermione, this isn't just reckless, it's dangerous." She folded her arms. "He's not a danger anymore." Harry's brow furrowed. "And you know that how?" "Because I was there," she snapped. "I saw it. The spell worked. The darkness is gone." He stared at her for a long time. "And what if it isn't? What if it's just hiding, waiting? You can't gamble the safety of our world on faith." Hermione's voice softened, almost pleading. "I'm not gambling, Harry. I'm believing. There's a difference." He looked away, his hands clenched at his sides. "You sound like Dumbledore." "Maybe he was right," she said quietly. Harry exhaled, the fight draining from him. "You always see light in the darkest places. I used to admire that about you." He turned toward the door. "But some things were meant to stay in shadow." When he left, Hermione sat in silence. She wanted to believe her choices had been right, that saving Tom had been more than just an act of defiance against fear. But doubt crept in like frost, delicate and relentless. Days turned to weeks. The news of the experiment faded from the ministry's rumor mills, replaced by other crises, other debates. Hermione resumed her duties, but every evening when her work was done, she found herself returning to the manor. Tom had changed. The sharp edge of restlessness that once clung to him was gone. He walked the halls without the unease that had once marked his every step. He spoke less of his past and more of the future, though what kind of future a man like him could have remained uncertain. One evening, she found him by the lake, sitting on a fallen log, the water rippling gently at his feet. The sun had dipped below the hills, and the first stars shimmered faintly above. "You come here often," she said, approaching quietly. "It's peaceful," he replied. "Reminds me of something I can't quite remember. Hogwarts, maybe? The Black Lake?" Hermione smiled faintly. "You used to walk by it at night, alone. I remember thinking you looked like someone who belonged to another world." He glanced up at her. "And now?" "Now," she said softly, You look like someone trying to belong to this one. He considered that, then nodded. I suppose I am. They sat in silence, listening to the wind in the reeds. The air smelled of rain and wildflowers. After a while, Tom said, "Do you ever think about what comes after all this? When the world no longer fears me, and you no longer need to watch over me?" Hermione hesitated. "I try not to think that far ahead. But you must." He looked at her, his voice low. "Because I do. I think about what life could be beyond fear, beyond redemption." "Tom." He stood, stepping closer, his shadow falling across her. "You freed me," he said quietly. "But what if the part of me that's human now, what if that's because of you?" Hermione's heart hammered. "You're giving me too much credit. Or not enough." He reached out, and for the first time she didn't stop him. His hand brushed her cheek, light as a spell's whisper. She felt warmth spread through her chest, fierce and unfamiliar. "You should be careful," she said, her voice barely more than a breath. "Of what?" "Of wanting what you can't have." Tom smiled faintly. "Then we're both in danger." She stepped back, breaking the moment before it could consume them. "This can't happen," she said firmly. He looked at her, and for a moment she saw sorrow in his eyes, the quiet understanding of a man who had once lost everything and dared to hope again. "Then tell me what I am to you," he said. She swallowed hard. "A responsibility." He smiled sadly. "Then I pity your responsibilities." She turned away, unable to meet his gaze. That night, long after she had returned to London, Hermione sat by her window, watching the city lights blur through the mist. She could still feel the warmth of his touch on her skin, a memory she could neither silence nor justify. She told herself that what bound them was duty, not desire, that she was protecting him, not falling for him. But deep down, she knew the truth. Somewhere in that lonely manor, a man who had once been the darkest wizard in history was learning to love again. And the woman who had sworn to never lose herself to anyone's magic was already halfway lost. The spell had worked, yes. But the bond it forged between them was a different kind of enchantment, one neither of them could control. And as summer deepened, Hermione Granger began to realize that saving Tom Riddle's soul might cost her her own peace in return. The weeks that followed blurred like ink in rain. Summer waned into early autumn, and the heather that covered the moors turned from violet to burnt gold. The air at the manor grew crisp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and damp earth. It should have been a time of quiet, of peace, but something beneath that calm was shifting, unseen yet certain. Hermione could feel it each time she visited. The magic in the manor had changed. Where once it had pulsed with unease, it now throbbed with something warmer, alive, as though the house itself breathed in rhythm with its inhabitants. She would not admit it aloud, but she had grown to love that feeling, the quiet hum that greeted her the moment she stepped through the door. Tom met her at the threshold that evening, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, a faint smudge of ink across his wrist. He looked almost ordinary, and that somehow unsettled her more than anything. "You're early," he said, his tone light but cautious. "There were no meetings today," she replied. "A rare gift." He smiled. "Then I'll try to make it worth your while." She tried not to return the smile, but failed. "You always think you can charm your way through everything." "Only you," he said. And for a moment the room seemed to tilt around them, fragile as spun glass. Hermione busied herself with her satchel, pretending not to notice. I brought more texts from the restricted section. I thought they might help you refine your magical control. He took the books from her hands, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest instant. You always bring knowledge when what I really need is wisdom. Wisdom can't be given, she replied, finding her voice again. You have to earn it. Tom's gaze lingered on her face, steady, unflinching. Then teach me. Hermione looked up sharply. That's not something I can teach. Then perhaps it's something I'll learn by watching you, he said, his voice low. She turned away before he could see her expression. You always say things like that when you want to distract me. Does it work? Unfortunately. He laughed softly, a sound she was still not used to hearing. They spent the next hours in quiet study, side by side at the long oak table. The runes they had designed now served as focus points for Tom's magical training. He traced them in the air with movements so precise that the golden lines shimmered like threads of light. Hermione watched, her quill poised above parchment, cataloguing every pulse of energy. Your control is remarkable, she said when he finished. It should be, he replied. It's all I've done for months. You're impatient, she chided gently. Perfection doesn't come in a season. I used to think perfection was power, he said. Now, I think it's peace, the one thing I never learned how to hold. Hermione hesitated. You sound almost wistful. Perhaps I am, he murmured. You gave me a second life, Hermione, but you never said what I'm supposed to do with it. She lowered her quill. Live it. He gave her a faint, skeptical smile. Simple words from a woman who hasn't truly lived since the war. Her throat tightened. That's unfair. Perhaps, he said, but not untrue. Hermione's eyes met his, and she saw no cruelty there, only the raw honesty of a man who had lost his place in the world. The silence between them thickened until she had to look away. You should rest, she said finally. I'll rest when I understand what it means to be human, he said. And do you? His smile was faint and sad. Not yet, but I'm beginning to. That night, the moon hung high over the moors, pale and watchful. Hermione stayed longer than she intended, drawn by the comfort of the fire and the strange serenity of Tom's company. They sat opposite each other, words fading into quiet. The firelight flickered across his face, catching in his eyes. He broke the silence first. Do you ever think about destiny? She frowned. Destiny? The idea that some lives are written before they're lived. I used to, she said slowly. When I was younger, I thought the war proved destiny was real, that everything happened for a reason. And now I think we make our own choices, even when the world tries to write the story for us. Tom leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. Then why does it feel as though every choice I make leads me back to you? The question hung between them like a spell neither dared to cast. Hermione's pulse quickened. Because I'm the one who brought you back, she said finally. You're tied to me, magically. Perhaps, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But sometimes it feels like something more. Hermione stood abruptly, needing to move, to breathe. I think that's enough for tonight. She turned toward the door, but his voice stopped her. You're afraid of what this means, he said. She froze. I'm afraid of what it could mean. Tom rose, the the firelight stretching his shadow across the wall. "You believe in redemption," he said softly. "You told me so. But can you believe in love that comes from it?" Her heart hammered so loudly she thought he could hear it. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't do this." He took a single step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Why not?" "Because it's wrong," she said, her voice breaking. "Because if anyone found out—" He shook his head. "I'm not talking about the world. I'm talking about you." Hermione closed her eyes, every word a battle. "I can't." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "Then I'll wait," he said, "however long it takes." She left before he could see the tears that gathered in her eyes. In the days that followed, Hermione tried to distance herself. She buried herself in work, avoided the manor, and threw herself into endless meetings that dulled her thoughts. But the ache remained. His voice echoed in her mind, his words repeating like a whisper she could not silence. When she finally returned to Hogsmeade weeks later, the manor felt different. The wards thrummed faintly with unease. Inside, Tom was nowhere to be found. "Tom!" she called. A door creaked open upstairs. She climbed the staircase, wand drawn, heart pounding. She found him in the old observatory at the top of the house. He stood before a shattered mirror, its glass reflecting fragments of his face. "What happened?" she asked. "I saw something," he said quietly. "Not a vision, a memory." Hermione stepped closer. "Tell me." He turned toward her, his expression haunted. "I remembered what it felt like to kill. The coldness, the ease. I thought it was gone, but it's still there, sleeping." Her breath caught. "Tom." He shook his head sharply. "You don't understand. I want to be good, Hermione. I want to be what you see in me. But what if I can't?" Hermione reached for him before she could think, her hand closing over his. "Then we'll keep fighting it. Together." He looked at her hand, then at her face. "You shouldn't say we. You don't belong in the darkness with me." She smiled sadly. "I've spent my whole life walking through darkness. I can handle yours." He stared at her, something fierce and fragile breaking in his expression. "Then I swear," he whispered, "I'll never let it touch you." The wind outside howled against the glass, and for a moment Hermione believed him. But as she looked into the shards of the broken mirror, she saw not two reflections, but three. Her own, Tom's, and a shadow behind them both, watching. It smiled. The shadow in the mirror lingered only an instant, but it was enough. Hermione's wand was in her hand before the breath had fully left her lungs. A dozen protective wards shimmered to life, golden runes circling them like a halo. But when the light dimmed, the third reflection was gone, vanished as though it had never been there. Tom stood motionless, eyes fixed on the shattered glass. "It wasn't just a trick," he murmured. "I felt it watching." Hermione lowered her wand slowly. An echo, perhaps, leftover magic from before the purification spell. He turned toward her, his expression unreadable. No, it was him, the part that refused to die. "Impossible," she said firmly, though her heart was pounding. "We destroyed the remnants." "Then tell me," he whispered, "why does it still know my name?" The wind outside howled again, rattling the windows in their frames. The storm had rolled back over the moors, heavy clouds pressing low against the horizon. The manor groaned under the weight of it, as if the very walls remembered darker times. Hermione reached out and gripped his arm. "Listen to me. You are not that man anymore. Whatever we saw, it was only a memory. Magic can echo, Tom, but it cannot resurrect what no longer exists." For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, with a slow nod, he whispered, "I want to believe you." "Then do," she said gently. But deep in her chest, a small voice whispered that belief was a fragile thing. The following day, the storm did not break. Grey clouds hung low over the moors, turning the world to mist and shadow. Hermione stayed at the manor, unwilling to leave him alone, though she pretended it was for research. They spent the morning in silence, each pretending to work, neither truly able to focus. When she looked up from her notes, she found him staring into the fire again, lost in thought. "You're quiet," she said softly. "I've been thinking about what it means to be free," he replied without looking at her. "I thought I'd achieved it when the darkness left me. But freedom seems to come with chains of its own." "Everyone carries something," she said. "The difference is whether we let it define us." Tom smiled faintly. "You sound like Dumbledore." Hermione's lips curved. "You could do worse than that." He turned to her, eyes glinting in the firelight. "You're wrong. I could do better." The weight of his gaze pinned her where she sat. There was warmth in it, yes, but something else too. A fierce, unwavering devotion that frightened her more than any remnant of Voldemort ever had. She looked away quickly. "You should eat," she said, standing. "I'll bring something from the kitchen." But when she returned with food, he was gone. She found him outside in the rain, standing barefoot in the garden as lightning forked across the sky. His hair clung to his face, and the wind tore at his robes, but he didn't move. "Tom," she called, running toward him. "What are you doing?" He turned slowly, rain streaming down his cheeks like tears. "It's calling to me," he said. Hermione stopped short. "What is?" "The shadow. It's not gone, Hermione. It's part of me. I thought I could silence it, but it only sleeps." She reached him, grabbing his arm. His skin was cold. "Then fight it. You fought before." He shook his head. "You don't understand. The more I feel, the more human I become, the stronger it grows, as though emotion feeds it." "Then we'll starve it," she said fiercely. "We'll find a way." He stared at her, eyes wild with a kind of desperation she had never seen in him. "You are the way," he whispered. "When I'm near you, the darkness quiets. But when you're gone," his voice broke. "It stirs again." Hermione's heart twisted. "Tom." "I don't know what's happening to me," he said, his voice low, trembling. "I can't tell where I end and he begins." Without thinking, she stepped closer and placed her hand against his chest. "You end here," she said, her palm pressed over his heartbeat. "This is you, not him." He caught her wrist, holding it there, his eyes locked on hers. The rain poured around them, thunder rolling across the hills. "Every time you touch me," he said quietly, "it feels like a promise I have no right to keep." She didn't pull away. "Then keep it anyway." For a heartbeat, the world stilled. The storm's fury faded into silence. Then Tom bent his head, slowly, as though afraid the moment would shatter if he breathed too loudly. Their lips met. It was not the desperate, wild kiss of old passion, but something quieter, trembling, full of ache and wonder. For a single, fragile moment, all the ghosts in the world fell silent. Then Hermione stepped back, her breath unsteady. "We can't," she whispered. "I know," he said, though the look in his eyes said otherwise. "You're my responsibility," she said. He smiled faintly. "Then perhaps you should stop saving me." They said little after that. The days resumed their rhythm, but something had changed. The silence between them no longer felt peaceful. It was taut, fragile, waiting to break. Hermione spent long hours in her office, sending reports to the ministry, her words hollow. At night, she dreamed of lightning and whispered voices calling from the shadows. Then, one morning, the wards flared. She was at her desk when the silver alarms ignited, flooding the air with light. Hermione's heart lurched. Only one kind of magic could trigger that signal. She apparated to the manor in an instant. The wards shimmered violently, magic crackling across the sky. The air was thick with power, wild, uncontrolled. She raced inside, her boots slipping on the marble floor. The study door hung open, its hinges scorched. Inside, Tom knelt in the center of a glowing circle, sweat pouring down his face. The runes they had crafted months ago blazed around him, their light pulsing like a heartbeat. "Tom!" she shouted. "Stop this!" He didn't answer. His hands trembled, and the air around him shimmered with heat. "I can't," he gasped. "It's fighting me." Hermione raised her wand. "Then let me help you." He looked up, his expression torn between pain and fury. "You can't! If you intervene, it'll consume us both." The circle flared crimson. The magic that had once freed him was turning against him now, threads of darkness weaving through the light like veins of smoke. Hermione ignored his warning and stepped into the circle. The energy struck her like a wave. Her knees buckled and pain shot through her body, but she forced herself forward, gripping his hands in hers. "Listen to me," she shouted over the roar. "You are not him. You are not his shadow." Tom's eyes met hers, and in them she saw two souls battling, one of light, one of fire. "Hermione!" "Fight it!" she cried. "For once in your life, fight for yourself." Something shifted then. The storm of magic twisted, and the red faded to gold. The runes pulsed once more, then shattered, releasing a blinding burst of light that threw them both backward. When Hermione opened her eyes, the study was silent. The wards had dimmed. The air smelled of smoke and salt. Tom lay a few feet away, unmoving. She crawled toward him, dread clawing at her chest. "Tom," she whispered. His eyelids fluttered. A faint smile curved his lips. "It's gone," he murmured. "All of it, even the shadow." Relief crashed over her, fierce and trembling. She pressed her forehead to his, tears spilling freely. "You did it." "No," he breathed. "We did." His eyes closed, his breathing slow and steady. Hermione held him there on the cold floor, the dawn creeping through the broken windows. Outside, the storm had finally passed. But in the silence that followed, she could not shake the feeling that the shadow's parting gift had been more than peace. For somewhere, faint and distant, she thought she heard a whisper, soft, cold, and familiar. "You cannot kill what was born from you." Morning broke over the moors like the slow lifting of a spell. Mist curled across the grass, catching on the thorny hedgerows that bordered the manor. The light was fragile, as though the sun itself feared to look too closely at what the night had wrought. Inside the house, Hermione sat beside the bed in the small upstairs chamber where they had carried Tom after the collapse. The healers she'd summoned had left hours ago, baffled by what they could not understand. His pulse was steady, his breathing shallow, alive, but caught somewhere between waking dream. Hermione had not left his side. She watched over him, sleepless, her thoughts as tangled as the curls of parchment stacked beside her. The runes from the failed spell burned faintly in her mind's eye, the echoes of their magic still humming in her bones. "Why do you always have to do everything yourself?" she whispered to the still figure on the bed. "Even this." He did not stir. The room was silent, but for the faint crackle of the hearth. The shadows on the walls shifted and danced with the firelight, but none dared to fall across him. When she could no longer sit still, Hermione rose and crossed to the window. Outside, the moors glistened with dew. A few brave beams of sunlight reached through the clouds and lit the grass in thin golden ribbons. It should have felt like peace. It didn't. Something had changed in the air. The wards, faint and transparent, pulsed once, then again. A warning. Hermione's hand flew to her wand. The light around the manor darkened, not from clouds, but from something heavier, colder. It seeped through the air like fog, curling along the floor, whispering as it moved. She turned sharply. "No," she said under her breath. "Not again." The shadows coalesced near the bed, drawing themselves together until they formed a single shape, a man-shaped void, darker than the firelight could touch. No face, no form, only an outline carved from absence. "I destroyed you," Hermione said, her voice trembling with anger more than fear. The shadow tilted its head, and when it spoke, the voice was like a whisper of serpents. "You destroyed nothing. You divided." Her pulse quickened. "He's not you. Not anymore." "He is what remains when mercy forgets itself," the voice hissed. "He is me, and I am him." "Then you're wrong," she said, raising her wand. "Because mercy doesn't forget. It redeems." The shadow laughed softly, the sound filling the room like a chill. "You gave the Dark Lord a heart, Hermione Granger. Do you really think it will save him? Or you?" Light flared from her wand, silver and bright. The spell struck the figure, scattering it like smoke. But the laughter echoed still, fading only when she whispered the final binding charm. The air cleared, the ward steadied. Yet the whisper remained in her mind, a haunting echo she couldn't silence. She turned back to the bed. Tom's eyes were open. For a heartbeat, she froze, afraid of what she might see there. But his gaze was clear, tired, human. "I heard it," he said hoarsely. "The shadow." Hermione knelt beside him. "It's gone now." He gave a faint, wry smile. "You're lying." She smiled back, though her eyes stung. "Only a little." He reached for her hand, fingers trembling. "Hermione, if he returns, don't," she said quickly. "Don't speak like that." He didn't argue. His hand tightened around hers, fragile but steady. "You should have let me end it with a spell." "I couldn't," she whispered. "I wouldn't. You risked your soul. Then it was worth it." The silence between them grew long and heavy. Outside, the wind shifted through the heather, carrying with it the scent of rain. Days passed. Tom grew stronger. The healers had no explanation for his recovery, calling it miraculous. Hermione called it something else: persistence. The ministry wanted reports, but she sent only brief letters, enough to calm them, never enough to reveal the truth. Her colleagues assumed she had succeeded in stabilizing the magical anomaly. Harry sent a single note written in his neat, weary script. "If it's over, come home." But she didn't go. She stayed in the manor, drawn back by something more than duty. Every evening she joined Tom in the library where the fire burned low and the air smelled of ink and dust. They spoke of small things, the weather, the books they read, the strange peace of a world that no longer expected anything from them. Yet beneath their words, a question lingered like an uncast spell. What now? One night, when the fire had nearly died, Tom broke the silence. "You should leave here," he said quietly. She looked up. "Why?" "Because I don't know what I am anymore," he said. "And whatever I am might not stay human forever." "You're afraid," she said softly. "Yes," he admitted. "For you." She smiled faintly. "Then that's proof enough that you're still human." He stared into the fire for a long moment. "If the shadow comes again, I won't let it use me. I'll stop it." Hermione stood, crossing to him. "Not alone." He looked up at her, his eyes dark and steady. "You'd risk everything again?" She met his gaze without hesitation. "I already did." He reached for her hand then, and she let him take it. His fingers were warm now, his touch gentle. The moment stretched, fragile as glass. "I used to think love was weakness," he said, "that it made people foolish, vulnerable, but it's the only thing that's ever truly undone me." Hermione's breath caught. "Love isn't undoing, Tom. It's rebuilding." He smiled, a quiet, broken smile that still managed to make her heart ache. "Then you've rebuilt me." She didn't speak. She only pressed her forehead against his, closing her eyes. The room filled with the soft hum of the wards, steady, alive, protecting them both. Weeks later, the ministry called for her again. A new disturbance had been reported in the north, a faint but unmistakable surge of ancient magic, darker than anything recorded since the war. Hermione knew before they even finished explaining what it meant. That evening, she went to him. He was sitting by the window, the sunset burning red behind him. "You felt it," she said. "Yes. It's calling to you." He nodded once. "It wants me back. You can resist it." "I can," he said, "but it won't stop calling." Hermione swallowed the ache in her throat. "Then I'll go with you." Tom rose, startled. "You can't." "I can," she said firmly. "You think I've come this far just to watch you walk into darkness alone?" His eyes softened. "Hermione." "I'll go with you," she repeated, "until the end." He studied her for a long time, then nodded. Then together. The following morning they left the manor. The moors stretched wide beneath a sky painted in shades of gold and grey. The air shimmered faintly with power, the kind that belonged to beginnings, or endings. As they walked, Hermione glanced at him. The wind tugged at his coat, lifting his dark hair from his brow. He looked less like the boy he had once been, and more like something new, something unrecorded. "Do you think we'll find peace?" she asked quietly. He smiled faintly. "If not peace, then purpose. And if we fail," he reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers, "then we'll fail together." The path ahead glowed faintly, a thread of light leading into the mist. Behind them, the manor stood silent and still, its windows reflecting the first true dawn in years. Hermione looked back only once. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw a figure watching from the upper window, a shadow with her eyes and his smile. Then the light changed, and it was gone. They walked on. The wind carried their footsteps across the moors until even the echoes faded, leaving behind only silence and the promise that some stories do not end in darkness, but in the quiet certainty of two souls that chose each other against the odds. And though no one in the wizarding world ever learned what became of the minister and her impossible companion, the legends whispered later that on the far edges of the world, where the veil between life and magic thinned, there were two lights walking side by side, one gold, one silver, forever intertwined.